So to add the mirror modifier, you want to click on the wrench here on the side panel, and that's going to go to the modifiers panel. So you can click on add modifier, and then you can look here through the modifiers. So you can go to generate, and then you can see here's the mirror modifier, and the icon sort of looks like a butterfly. However, I just like to click on add modifier and then start to type in mirror. And then there it is, just add the mirror modifier. So now the cube is being mirrored from one side over to the other side, but you can see it appears as though nothing really happened. But that's because the cube is already symmetrical. So if you kind of look at the center of the cube, this side is the same as this side, so it's basically just overlapping another cube on top of itself. Now on default, the mirror modifier mirrors all the objects from the object's origin. So it basically sees the object's origin as being the center for where it's going to mirror. And so you can see with the cube here, that little kind of orange yellow dot there, that is the origin, and every object in Blender has an origin point. And when you hit G to grab, or R to rotate, or S to scale, you can see on default, it's going to be transformed by where the origin is. Now the origin point is turned on default, but if for some reason you don't see it, then you need to make sure you click here to show the overlays, because if you hide the overlays, it's going to be disappeared. And also if you click on the overlays drop down, make sure you check mark the origins to see the object's origins. Now let's say that I wanted to mirror the cube over to the other side. Well, if I just hit G to grab and drag it over here to the other side, you can see it's not mirroring it over on this side. And that is because I moved the object in object mode, and so the entire object along with the origin is moving over to the side. Well, if I, however, hit tab to go into edit mode, we're now in edit mode of the object, and I can hit G to grab, and I can just move the mesh around. And so you can see now the origin point is staying in the center, because in object mode, you move the object, which moves the origin, but in edit mode, you can just move individual mesh. And another thing which is very useful to know is that if you have an object like this and you don't want to like move it over, you just want to cut it in half, is you could add a loop cut in the very center and cut it in half. So what I can do is hit Control R to add a loop cut. And so you can see that little yellow lines appears, and that's going to show me where I can add loop cuts. So I'm going to left click, and then I want this loop cut to stay in the very center. So you can just right click, or you can hit the escape key. So Control R, left click, and then right click or escape, and then it'll just stay in the very center. So now what I can do is hit A to deselect everything. I can hit B for the box select, and I'm gonna box select just these vertices here, and I'll hit X and I can just delete the vertices. So now that I delete the vertices, you can see because we have that mirror modifier turned on, that is what the mirror modifier is doing. Now the mirror modifier also has a few different settings, and the most common setting to use is the axis here. So you can tell the mirror modifier which axis you want it to mirror by. So here in the Blender grid here, there is the red line, which is the x-axis. So that makes sense that the x is turned on, it's going to mirror on the x-axis. There's also the green line, which is the y-axis. And then if I hit 1 to go to front view, there is the z-axis, which is up and down. And you can't actually see the z-axis right here. If I just click on the overlays there, I can click on Z, and now we can actually see the z-axis. So what I'm going to do is hit Control R to add another loop cut, and I will left click and right click, and then Control R to add another loop cut, and I'll left click and right click. So now if I deselect everything, I can hit B for the box select this side, also hit B for box select and box select that side, and I can hit X and I can delete the vertices. So now we just have this little corner here of the box. So without the mirror enabled, this is what it's going to look like. So you can see I can mirror it on the X axis, which is back and forth this way, the Y axis, which is back and forth this way, and the Z axis, which is up and down. So now even though we only have like a very small corner of the cube, it's being mirrored on all the axes. And one really cool use for this is that you could like go to the face select a face. I could, for example, hit E to extrude, and then I to inset, and then E to extrude it back, I to inset again, extrude it out. I could also like hit Control R to add a loop cut, and I could scroll my mouse wheel to add some cuts. And if I go to like the face select, I could select some of these faces and I could extrude them out. So as you can see, the mirror modifier is taking that little corner of the cube and it's mirroring it over to the other sides. So we can get a lot of detail very quickly by just modeling a small corner, and it's going to mirror it to the other side. Now, when it comes to these axes, these use the local axis, and the local axis is the X, Y, and Z axis according to the object, not the world. So for example, right now this cube is at its default position, and so the global x-axis is this red line here, but then the local x-axis is going in the same direction. However, if I were to rotate this on the z-axis and rotate it around like this, now the local axis of the cube would be going back and forth this way. So if I hit G to grab and then hit X, you can see here is the global x-axis. But if I were to hit G to grab, hit X, and then hit the X key twice, that is now the local x-axis, because we rotated the object. Now why this is useful to know is because let's say I delete the mirror modifier, and let's just rotate this object on the z-axis by 90 degrees and hit enter. So now what I'll do is I'll click on add modifier and I will type mirror and add the mirror modifier. So let's say you want to mirror this side of the cube over to this side of the 3D space. So if you look at the axes, you can see here's the x-axis, so you might want to click on X. However, it's mirroring it over this way, so it appears as though it's mirroring it on the y-axis. But that is because we rotated the object over by 90 degrees. So again, it's using the local axis, not the global axis. However, there's an easy way to fix this if you rotated the object. So what you can do is just hit Control A, and you can apply the object's rotation. You can also apply the location, rotation, and scale. In this case, I just want to apply the rotation. So when I apply the rotation, that's now giving it a new default rotation. So now the local axis and the global axis are aligned up. So now it's mirroring over correctly on the x-axis. Let's just delete this object, and I'm going to go to the add menu, and let's just add a monkey head. So for example, if you're modeling like a more complex object and you want to mirror this, you can hit 1 to go to front view. You can hit tab to go to edit mode. You can click here to go to the vertex select. And then if I want to delete half of this, I can hold down the Z button and move my mouse over to the wireframe. Then I'll hit A to deselect everything. And then to select half of this, I can hit B for the box select. And I can click right here, right on the very end, and drag all the way over like that, let go. So I'll hit X and we can just delete the vertices. And I'll go back to solid view. So we now just have half of a monkey head. So now if I click on add modifier and I search for the mirror modifier, you can see the monkey has been mirrored over. So then what I could also do is, for example, hit Control 2. Control 2 adds a subdivision surface modifier to the object. So now if I hit tab to go into edit mode, I'm gonna, for example, just select a vertex here on the ear, and I can press the O key to turn on proportional editing. So now I can hit G to grab, and I could like move this ear around. If I want to make it bigger, maybe I could scale it, and you can see the other ear is going to move along with it. So it's going to adapt because it is using the mirror modifier. So I'm just going to add a new cube again, and let's just move the cube over here. So let's say that I want to add a mirror modifier to this, so I'll add a mirror modifier, but the problem is the origin point is right here. But let's say that I want to bring the origin point back to the center. So an easy way to do this is to select the object, and you can press Control A, and then you can apply the location. So click on apply location. So now the location is applied. That is going to reset the origin point back into the center of the scene. So now you can see it's mirroring over from this side to this side. Another way to do this is to press Shift C. Shift C is going to center the 3D cursor. You can also do this by pressing Shift S, moving your mouse to cursor to world origin and then letting go. So now the 3D cursor is right there. You can just click on object, set origin, and you can set origin to 3D cursor. So now the origin point is right there in the center. However, let's say that I wanted to keep the cube in this position, but I want to just mirror it over here on the end of the cube. So what I could do is go into edit mode. I could go to the face select and then select this face. Then what I can do is use the same shortcut. So Shift S. So hold down Shift S. And then what I can do is click on cursor to select it. So move your mouse down and then let go of Shift S. And that is going to bring the 3D cursor to what we have selected. So now if I hit tab to go back to object mode, I can click on object, set origin, and I can set the origin to the 3D cursor again. And now you can see the cube didn't move, but the mirror part of it did move over here because now the origin point is right there on the edge of the cube. Another useful thing to know is that if you move an object, the object isn't going to be in its default position. So what you can do is press Alt-G, and Alt-G is going to clear the locations. So it's a little bit different from applying the location. So if I hit Control-A and apply the location, it's going to move the origin back to the center, but the mesh will stay where it is. Whereas if I hit Alt-G, Alt-G will bring the origin to the center and move the mesh along with it. So it's going to clear any transform that you've done to the object and move it into the center. So what I'm going to do is delete everything, and I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to add a cylinder. And let's say that I'm modeling a car tire. So first what I could do is rotate this by 90 degrees. So rotate it on the y-axis by 90 degrees. And then I could add the mirror modifier. Then I could hit tab to go to edit mode. I could hit Control R to add a loop cut and left click and right click. So now if I hit B for the box select and box select this side, I can delete that side. And then the problem is that it's not mirroring it over on the x-axis because we rotate the object. So if I hit Control A, I can apply the rotation. So now if I hit tab to go to edit mode, I can select everything, scale it down, and just kind of bring it in here. Now this brings me to another issue, which is how to know if the object is overlapping the mirror. So if I just like drag this in here, you can see this part of the object is actually going to overlap. So if you hold down the Z button, go to wireframe, this face is overlapping the other face. So to fix this, you can actually merge or clip the endpoints together. So to do this, you want to turn on the clipping button. So check mark clipping, and now if I hit G to grab and drag this together, now when I click to place that, if I try to drag it back, you can see it's connected. So if I select this loop here and hit G to grab and try to drag it away, I can't drag it away. But if I turn clipping off, now I could hit G to grab and bring it away. But if the clipping is turned on, as soon as it touches the center point, it's going to be merged together. So that is super useful. You should definitely use that all the time when you're using the mirror modifier if the object is going to connect with itself. So now we don't have any overlapping faces. All right, so there's our basic car tire. Let me just hold down the Alt key, select that loop, and I'll hit Control B to add a bevel, something like that. So let's just say I'm modeling a simple car tire. So let's say that I move this over here, and I want the origin point to be right over here because I'm using the mirror modifier. However, let's say that I also want to mirror a car tire on the other side. Well, you can actually choose another object to be basically the origin point. So you can add an object to replace it for the origin point. So what I can do is add another mirror modifier. So the first mirror modifier is mirroring over half of the cylinder, but let's add another mirror modifier. And so you can see the mirror modifier doesn't appear as though it's doing anything because the origin point is right here. But we have this really cool option called mirror object. So if I go to the add menu, let's just add some sort of object in the very center. So let's add an empty plane axis. And why I'm adding an empty plane axis is because these empty objects don't have any visible faces, so they're not going to show up in the render. So they're basically invisible. And if you move the empty, you can hit Alt-G to bring it back to its default location. So if we now just select the cylinder, you can see on this mirror object, we can choose an object to replace the origin. So I'm going to click on the eyedropper, and then let's just choose the empty. Or you can click on the drop down and choose any object. So now the mirror modifier is basically seeing this as the center of the object or the origin. So if I bring it closer or farther away, it's going to change the distance because it's seeing this as the very center instead of the origin point. Now another really cool feature with this is that I could drag this back and forth on the y-axis, but that's not going to change the distance back and forth between these two cylinders. So if I just drag this right over here, now if I just select these cylinders again, as well as mirroring it on the x-axis, I could mirror on the y-axis. And now you can see we're creating a basic car with 4 tires. So even though we have 4 whole tires, we actually only need to model half of a tire, and it's going to mirror over to this side and then mirror over to the rest of the car. Now a common issue with the mirror modifier that you might run into or forget to do is that you might accidentally have a face in the very center of the mirror. So let's just click on add modifier and add a mirror modifier, and then I'll go into edit mode and I'll go to the face select, and I'll just select this face and drag it back. And then as I talked about, I could turn on the clipping option and drag it in right here. So now it's going to clip with the very center. So now you can see that the cube is symmetrical, so I can just do some modeling and I can extrude this. However, the problem is that if I go inside here, go inside the mesh, we have an extra face here that we don't actually need. And it may not look like it's an issue right now, but if I, for example, hit Control 2 to add a subdivision surface modifier, and then let's just hit shade smooth, so shade the object smooth with the object context menu, you can now see there's this really weird shading issue. And this is because if I go inside the mesh, you can see there is a extra face there, and the face is kind of overlapping there in the very center. So if I hit tab to go to edit mode, you can see there is the extra face. So if I select the face and hit X to delete, I can delete the faces, and I can see that extra face has disappeared. Now the order that you add the modifiers is very important because Blender is going to use the first modifier, then the second modifier, and so on. So it's going to start from the very first one and then go down. And so why you might run into issues with the modifier stacking is because let's just say I'm going to add the mirror modifier to mirror this object over. So I will turn on clipping, I'll go into edit mode, and I'll drag it in here so it merges with the other part of the object. So now I want to smooth out this object. So I'm going to hit Control 3 to add a subdivision surface modifier with 3 levels, and I'll shade it smooth. So you can see now the object is nice and smoothed out. However, if I were to put the subdivision before the mirror, so let's say I subdivide it first and then add a mirror, now you can see we're running into some weird issues here because it looks really sharp on the end, and also when I shade it smooth, it has some weird shading issues. And that is because if I just delete the mirror, you can see it's subdividing it first, and so because it's subdividing it first, it's kind of smoothing out and making it nice and round. That's what it would kind of be like. So the mirror modifier is sort of seeing it as if it's this object. So now if I add the mirror modifier, you can see it's going to be sharp. But if I don't want that, let me just hit Control Z to undo that. I would first want to add the mirror modifier to mirror it back and forth, And then I would want to add the subdivision surface modifier to smooth it out. So if you are running into some issues, maybe take a look at your modifier stack. You can click on these little dots here in the corner and you can drag with the modifiers and you can drag them up and down to change the order. You can also click on the little arrows here to minimize them so that they are smaller. Now, as well as the axis setting, there is also a bisect setting. So if I turn on, for example, the X bisect, if I go into edit mode, let's just drag this forward. So you can see if I bring this forward, what the bisect is going to do is it's going to delete any parts of the mesh which is over here on this side. So it's almost acting like a Boolean, and it's sort of cutting out the part of the mesh which is going through the mirror. Now, I really don't use the bisect that often. I've really never used it for any projects, but it could be useful for some things, but I would just like drag it over here and make sure it isn't overlapping with the mirror. But if for some reason you kind of need to kind of Boolean that and get rid of the extra mesh, you could use the bisect. And so you can use it for the x-axis, the y-axis, and the z-axis. Now the flip option is going to flip the bisect. So instead of it deleting this side of the mesh, if you flip it on the x-axis, it's going to delete the other side of the mesh. So of course that looks really weird, that's not really what I'm going for, but it may come into use sometimes, but I really have never used this feature. Now, as well as using the clipping feature to make sure the mesh merges with itself when it gets to the very center, you can also use this merge option. So let me just turn off the clipping and I'll drag the cube back here, so I want to merge this together. Well, if I turn on clipping, I can now drag up this value, and when I drag it up to the correct amount, larger than this value, it's going to merge any of the vertices together. So it starts to merge where the center of the object is, and then as you turn up more and more, this number is going to get bigger. So you can see now it's going to merge these two together even though they're actually kind of far away. So this is another feature that I really don't use that much. I usually just use the clipping, so I turn on clipping, and then when I drag it together, you can see it's going to merge together. Now all of the modifiers in Blender have these little buttons right up here. So I'll show you what all of these do. So the first one is the on cage, and if I turn on the on cage, if you go into edit mode, it's going to appear as though the modifier is sort of applied. So I can actually select this side of the mesh, even though the actual part of the mesh is over on this side. If the on cage is turned on, I can select this part of the mesh and move it around. So it can be useful occasionally if for some reason you do want to model this side, but if I like hit G to grab and try to drag it away, you can see it's going the opposite direction as my mouse because the actual mesh is over here on this side. So it can be a little bit confusing, but if you do want to model this side, you can turn on the on cage. The other setting is the display in edit mode. So let's say you're working on a pretty complex object and you don't want to actually see any of the modifiers or a certain modifier. So let's say you're zooming in here and you're modeling something very specific. You could turn on the display in edit mode, and then if I go into edit mode and I turn this off, now you can see the modifier is going to be disappeared in edit mode, but it's still going to show up in object mode. So I can go into edit mode, I could like go inside the mesh, do some modeling maybe inside the mesh. Then if I hit tab, I can now just see the modifier again. Now the last two buttons here are the disable in viewport and disable in render. So if I just turn off this button, the monitor icon, it'll just be disabled from the viewport, but when you render the scene, it'll still show up. And then the other option is the disable and render, so I can still see the mirror modifier, but if I were to actually render this, the mirror modifier would be disappeared. And then if you click on the drop down, there's a few other settings. So you can apply the modifier. So let's say I do some modeling. So I'm just going to like select the ear, turn on proportional editing. Let's just scale this up like this. Let's say that I want to apply the modifier so that it's now all geometry. Well, if I click on the drop down, I can click on apply, and the shortcut key for this is to select the modifier, and with your mouse hovered over the modifier, press Ctrl A. So you can press Ctrl A and that will apply the modifier. So now you can see it's all actual geometry, or you can just click on the drop down and you can just apply the modifier. And there's a few other settings that you might use occasionally. You could duplicate the modifier. So if you've like added a bunch of settings and you want to duplicate the same exact settings, you could duplicate it. And there we have two of them. And you can also like move the modifier up and down. You can also rename the modifier, so I could click right here to rename it, and I could rename it to, for example, Mirror Monkey. And this is useful if you have many modifiers. So if I add like a subdivision surface, then maybe I add like a solidify modifier. And so if you have lots of modifiers, you can just click here to rename the modifiers. And of course, if you want to delete a modifier, you can just click on the exit button right there, and that is going to delete the modifiers. So I hope you found this video helpful, and thank you for watching. And a few other videos that you might be interested in checking out is my tutorial on modifiers for beginners. So in that video, I cover all the basic modifiers that beginners need to know and how to use the different basic modifiers. And I also have another video on how to fix common mirror modifier issues. So if you're working on a project and you're having some issues with the mirror modifier and you don't quite know what's going on, I go over some different common problems which can come up when you're using the mirror modifier. So if you're interested in checking out those videos, links are in the description. And finally, if you want to help support this YouTube channel to help me keep on creating these free videos, then a great way to do that is by joining my Patreon page, where you'll be helping to support the channel each month and you'll get access to lots of Blender content. So I hope you found the video helpful, and thank you for watching.